Now, on to our first panel, where we're going to be talking about the top HR trends at the moment. I'm delighted to be joined by Sinead Pross, who is the Leia Healthcare Head of Health and Wellbeing, and Gillian French, who's an expert on residents, the expert in resident employee engagement at Work Vivo. I nearly got it right. I nearly got it right. Lovely to see you both. Thank you so much for joining us here. The stats from the survey are really, really interesting. 60% of employees are fully back on site, 25% of employees hybrid, 15% fully remote. When you think about the last time we did this, how many more were fully remote at that stage? 38% of companies are mandating actual days on site. This is a shocker. Now, 3 in 4 employees want a shorter working week. Who'd have thought that would be the case? And building better balance, 63% of hybrid workers report better work-life balance in the last 6 months. Sinead, there's so much we need to unpack, but it would be remiss of us not to talk about the biggest issue that came back, which is cost of living and the impact that that's having on employees.
So, as you say, this is the 4th wave of research that we've done, right? And the research was conducted from July to September. So it's a pulse, right? It's an index. We're going to do it again next year. There's 3 key things, right? The first one is the cost of living is absolutely what's driving anxiety and stress in the workplace. That is resounding from employees. We'll talk a little bit more about that, right? The second one is HR leaders are saying, they're more worried about employees' mental health. And I think the big thing, you talk about the 4-day work week. Right now, we see employees value well-being just as much as salary. Who'd have thought? That doesn't mean that money isn't still important. Money is still really, really important.
Yes, very much so.
Right? But so is well-being. So for me, they're the 3 really key insights that have come out of the research.
Let's just begin with the cost of living. 58% of HR leaders say the rising cost of living is their employees' biggest concern. Given what we're facing into now, which is a winter of uncertainty, that's only going to get worse, isn't it?
Yeah. So that is like 4 out of the 5 reasons why people are stressed and anxious are to do with financial. They don't have as much money in their pocket now as they did last year. So the expenditure is going up, but the income is the same. I think Owen McGee is going to talk to that later. That will be really interesting to hear. It's really realizing that that's what it is right now. And that's probably what it's going to be for the next 6 months. We hope it's not going to be longer than that. So when you know that, then it's important to address that in the workplace, right? 33% of HR leaders really worried about the mental health of their employees. That's up 18 percentage points from last year. Last year, there was hope. We were being vaccinated. We were going on to the second booster. Now there's this financial crisis, this cost of living looming. Important to address that.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a perma-crisis, Gillian, isn't it? We're literally going from one to another. We thought COVID was the worst thing that was ever going to happen. Now we're in an inflationary spiral and the cost of living is going up, and that's having a huge impact on engagement with employees.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting about the research was when I went through it, I was sort of, ticking the box. Yes, I've seen that. Yes, that totally resonates with me. But the financial piece didn't. I'm actually not hearing leadership teams talking about it. I'm not seeing sort of webinars on it or it being raised at management meetings about how to deal with this. And I'm also not hearing it from employees. And I think it was interesting when I reflected back on the crash in 2007, 2008, people didn't tend to talk about money either. Because it can be hard for you to speak up and say, in work, I'm actually having financial issues. Because instantly then the company are going to think, is this person looking for a pay rise? Whereas there's other things that you can do as an employer.
Is it money the big taboo, though? It always was. If you talk about money, all of a sudden the shutters go up. Whereas this is different this time, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's well, we've seen people are rising up now and talking about it a little bit more. But I think our handling of it has to be probably a little bit different, like how we've handled things in organisations, the same as mental health. Again, I think we need to make it okay for people to say that. I think we need to build our initiatives around that, give people assistance, such as financial advice, in how to manage their existing paycheck. It's not always to just keep giving pay rises because that impacts the business as well. But it's really, again, making it okay for people to be vulnerable in the workplace, and that there aren't going to be repercussions or something bad isn't going to come out of that.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? That it's okay to talk about. I mean, how many times have we used that phrase about various different issues?
Yeah.
Right now, it's okay to talk about money. It's okay
Correct.
to talk about the fact that somebody feels they're under pressure. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have to give them money. It just means you can
Agree.
talk about it.
And I think there's so many HR leaders here who are expected to be these unicorns. I think you were saying that this morning, that they have an answer for everything. And it's like, well, if the issue is money, oh my God, people are going to look for more money. And it's not that. It is not that. It's the value that they get from their work. That's the key thing. So how to address it, it's not like, okay, people are going to be looking for higher incomes. You can't control that, but you can look at ways of improving financial literacy, education, and helping people with cost of living concerns, right? We see that coming through. People are, struggling with their expenditures, struggling with, the price of diesel going up, the cost of energy. That's coming. How can companies help people with that?
Let's talk about mental health as well, because there is a natural throughput from that to the mental health of employees. And just a key stat, 36% of employees said their mental health was good in the past 6 months. That's really low.
Very low.
And it's alarmingly low when you think about it. And the idea that they will park that when they come through the door to work is a nonsense.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mentioned 2008, right? That was the genesis of EAP, Employee Assistance Programs, for those who don't know what EAP is. And we've now evolved that into a 24/7 mental wellbeing support program for all lay healthcare members over the age of 16. It's what we see on the ground, Jonathan, is, you still have first presentations of people going into occupational health are mental health related. It's still about 50%. It was 50% last year. It's still trending the same. But there's a doubling of those who also need access to physio, musculoskeletal related issues. It's having an impact on our physical health. Persistent headaches, lower back pain. Employers need to realize, that's not going away. So that chronic, the impacts of the pandemic and where we are now, that is having an impact on health, for sure.
Gillian, when employers hear that kind of thing, the old school employer goes, that's nothing to do with me. I had nothing to do with that. I'm not paying them to do a job at the end of the day. How do we break through that mindset? How do we make people realise there is no place for that in the modern work environment?
Yeah, I think the traditional way I probably would have done that is sort of return on investment, and you use that language because you need to match the language that is understood. So to say, absolutely, if your employee is feeling well and they're going to be more productive, and try and link it. But really, I think it does come down to leadership, and leadership has to change. Our view of work has to change, and our view of leaders. We've had these leaders that drive for results, are transactional, are short term, and we need a change in our leadership now to deal with the next generation and to deal with these new, I suppose you need to be cognitively fluid to deal with all these things that are coming at leaders. And I would challenge that maybe the leadership and the traditional leadership we have are, under pressure now to evolve and change. And if they don't evolve and change, they will be changed.
What was interesting in the survey as well was the generational gap and the gender difference in people reporting how stressed they were. Did that surprise you?
No.
No.
So, I mean, just to give you the top line, women and younger people are more likely to report poor mental health in the first 6 months of the year. So why is that?
You think about it, right? We talked a lot about this morning because we're both working mums. And it's not to just talk about working mums, but the mental load for a woman is greater than a man. And I'm okay to say that. It's just greater. You carry the mental load more. So, okay, I'm doing head lice at the moment with my kids. I think everybody heard about it this morning.
It's a joy. It really is a joy.
And it's like, it needs to be done. And I wish my husband would have the patience to do it. He's brilliant at cooking, so I'm delighted. But
it balances out, yeah.
It's balancing that out, right?
Yeah.
And that mental load, you also bring that to work. You don't switch off being a mom, or you don't switch off being a woman and come into the workplace.
Nor
and
should
say,
you. I think for too long we have been told that if you are to be promoted, or there's a particular way of being within the workplace, and actually the nurturing, I suppose, competency or the way the feminine is should be embraced within the workplace, and including men being able to be like that too. I think, again, we traditionally think of people and leaders as, confident, ambitious, but that's, if we introduce these new skill sets and be able to be ourselves, I think the workplace will be a better place.
Yeah,
and Jonathan, just on that, right? We looked at, you had some lovely stats at the start about this many people are working fully
There's
remote.
the Lewis, by the way. We have a Lewis nearby, just passing us by. So little ding-dings every now and then are not a reflection on Sinead. It's just a reflection that Lewis is trying to not hit something. So anyway, go carry on.
God, it's not a red buzzer. It's like, so we look at the hybrid workers and we say they're the happiest, right? Because they've got work-life balance, they've got flexible working, but they're missing out on exposure to senior management. Okay? Those who are working fully on site are getting the exposure to senior management, but they're more at risk of burnout. Those who are working fully remotely see their work as being very transactional. So there is no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all. And it's really understanding what's that value proposition for you in the workplace. That's what we've got to look at.
And I've got to talk to you about engagement in a little bit, if I can, Gillian. But just before we move off the idea of mental health, hybrid workers more likely to report good mental health. So that's back to that key thing of balance, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, when you stand back and look at it, I think work was pretty much broken before the pandemic. But then we got time to think about it and we're like, okay, this all makes sense, which just shows us when we're so busy, we can't really think straight. But when you actually sit back, of course it's going to be better for people if they're not out of their house at 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. and 5 days a week on the road and missing all that time with their children. Of course, having a bit of balance, going in, getting your social needs met 2 or 3 days, and then being at home to get the house set up so that you're better organised. It's obvious. But sometimes the things, I don't know what happens to us, the most of us, it makes sense and we say yes. The same way for organisations, you treat your people well, they will work well for you, trust them and they'll give it back. They're all obvious things, but we seem to just sometimes mess it up.
Well, yeah, it's funny though, because we spent ages saying, oh, well, working from home would never work and that's going to kill culture and it's not going to be able to do this, that or the other. And now there is a narrative out there, Sinead, that, oh, well, we have to get back to the office and it's a disaster that people aren't on site 24/7. How can we not kind of realise that there's benefits to this?
There's benefits, and it's going back again to say, we've gone from a time where we've pushed everybody out of the office into the home because the office was not safe.
Yeah.
And you know what? Productivity went through the roof. Productivity equals, again, transactional, the amount of work done. Yeah. But innovation suffered, culture suffered. People felt isolated. And now we're like, come on, you need to come back into the office 5 days a week. And there's that brings such a tension and anxiety if it's the same work that you did while you were at home.
And you know you can do it at home. And you know you're more productive at home. Yeah. Why do we want to do that to people? Because surely that's very obvious. And we've had a lot of companies who've been pushing this policy at a global level. And you're kind of sitting there going, why? Why are you doing this?
Because it's familiar to some and it works for some. I mean, I've been in HR for years and many times I've sat around and people are sort of like, well, I like this, so therefore everybody else, and you can't, when you're in HR, you're making any decision for an organisation, one size does not fit all, But I think it's to get people back in. They feel it's not working, so therefore if I go back to what was working, but it's just not the case. The context has changed, and for leadership we all know context is everything. So the context has now changed. The old way is not going to work, so you have to think differently. I personally think giving it to the teams is the best way forward. You get the team to figure things out because every team is going to be different. Some technical teams, it might be easier for them to be at home more than, say, relationship-based teams that need to build relationships. So it's really empowering the teams and the leaders, empowering them to make the decisions, because every team will be different and every combination will be different.
There are phrases, though, Sinead, that would put the fear of God into some leaders. The way that they run their business, it's the way I was taught, and it's the way I'll always do it. And if I want to shout at someone, I'll shout at someone. When they hear phrases like compassionate leadership,
Empathetic.
yeah, empathetic, they don't believe that they can be that person. And as a result, they don't change, regardless of the fact that the people who are beneath them are benefiting from said forms of management.
Yeah. And you go back to what you made earlier, that point about leadership, right? So again, this time last year, we saw a third of employees said they were thinking of switching their jobs next year. And you're always going to get turnover. You're always going to get people saying we're going to switch, especially younger people. But that was 45% with those 18 to 35-year-olds. Why? Because I don't feel my employer really cares about my well-being. And that's what we're here to talk to today. And it's knowing that that's now valued as equally as salary. Call it work-life balance. It's trying to understand what does that mean for that cohort or that segment. And it's about having that flexibility. And leaders need to realize that. That is the future of the workplace, whether they like it or not. There's no going back to the way things were.
The funny thing is when you talk about leadership, a lot of it is doing engagement. And there's been a big push. You guys in WorkVivo have been leading the trend on this, which is making sure that the people who are working for you are engaged, no matter where they are, whether they're a global team, whether they're a local team working from home, whether they're just people within the same building that don't understand what others do. That level of engagement has become really, really important. And you guys have literally made a business out of it, haven't you?
Yeah, so I work with WorkVivo, as you know, and that is our business. And the main elements that we'd focus on is communication. And communication in this new way of working, as everybody knows, has become a lot more difficult. So the platform really helps with that. But it's really about building social bonds, because now that we are, and again, it is amazing that people are remote and hybrid and works for them, but we still want the connection. Like, you know, deep down, I was actually at something recently where they're challenging Maslow's hierarchy of needs, saying, you know, before food and water, you actually need social connection. It's the most important thing for us. So within WorkVivo, that's what we work at day in day, is how do we build that around the organisation in this new way of working? Because the world of work is changing, so we have to keep pace with that. But it's just dedication to how do you build those moments at the water cooler, the canteen, where you get to talk to someone? How do you connect people with similar interests? How do you get them to find each other? And that's what we do through the platform, and it's been huge. The business has just taken off because of that.
Well, it's recreating those conversations. I mean, it was explained to me quite easily that, you know, the best opportunity a young employee can often have is getting stuck in the lift with the CEO and having that opportunity to make an impression. But there is a problem with the hybrid way of working, with people not being in the office. That younger generation is suffering a little bit in terms of engagement, Sinead.
Yeah, and they are seeking it. I mean, this is the dichotomy, isn't it? They want the flexibility, they want the social interaction, but it's also it's the digital world we live in right now. So if you can do your work digitally, why do you need to be physically there? Which is quite interesting, right? And it's cracking that nut, and it's really saying that's what it is. And the elevator pitch. I mean.
But I just find it fascinating, because I mean, I used to be terrified meeting the boss in the lift. But at the same time, that was the only chance I normally had to engage with the boss unless I got into trouble and I had to end up at his office or her office. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for it. The changing role of the physical office as well, though. I want to touch on this because there is a big shift, isn't there? Offices are no longer places of work. They're places of gathering.
Collaboration spaces. I think, again, we need to rethink that. They don't have to be offices either, you know. I think there would be great value in even, you know, sort of heritage sites, or getting something there. You get people to come at a specific time and get to be with nature and, you know, maintain their well-being, because there's a big connection with nature, and we've all reconnected during COVID. So you don't just have to think that we go back to the same setup. But I certainly think offices have to be redesigned in a different way. If you are staying with the building that you're in, collaboration spaces, you know, places, lovely places where people can go and have a coffee. I think the biggest letdown after COVID for a lot of people, where they went back into the office and it was like one of those moments. They were so excited, and
and the kettle still didn't
the milk
work.
was gone off, and they went to talk to someone and they had their headphones on. They were like, "I'm on a call." It was like, "Oh, this isn't what I remember."
Yeah, I think as well, coming back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think this is really interesting right now, where people are going to struggle with their expenses. The office is warm, it's heated,
Yeah.
it's safe, okay? It's bright, you're not paying for those bills, your employer is. And you know what? Most people who are here probably have a really great restaurant. And, if people are really struggling, why not invite families in for dinner? Let's rethink what that space is and the community it serves.
It's a weird crisis because it is down to expenses and cost of living and putting diesel into the car. At a time when we are virtually at full employment, Sinead, retention becomes really, really important, doesn't it? So a lot of the things that we're talking about here will be key to keeping people in jobs. So the companies that continue to innovate and evolve are the ones who are going to hold their staff for longer. So what advice do you give from the survey in relation to that?
I think it's clear. It's salary, absolutely, but well-being. And I know it's the well-being index, but it's just, treat people like people, listen to them. They will tell you what they value, We've seen protests last week, cost of living protests in Dublin, the budget has just been released. People are telling. I think if you listen to your employees and your teams, they will tell you what they really, really value. If they're listened to, they will stay with you. And you know what? They'll want to grow your business.
Yeah, and it's watching the trends, taking the temperature. I mean, that's what you guys do in Work Vivo. You can actually spot things coming, can't you? And it's about HR people being tuned into that.
Yeah, and leadership teams. All too often I hear leadership teams say people are number one, people are a business. Then you attend one of their executive meetings or observe, and they're never discussed once. The culture is never discussed once. And if it is within strategic objectives, they're right at the bottom, and they're kind of nearly, we don't have enough time for that. Yeah. So I think it's really about, let's stop doing lip service. Let's really start putting people at the top of the agenda and their well-being.
It's funny, Sinead, when we did this last year, I think we were in a studio, just the two of us, having a chat, based on the findings that were in the survey. But now, when you think about it, we couldn't have predicted cost of living, no more than we could have predicted COVID, no more than we could have predicted another crisis. So I wanted to finish up by asking you both the same question, which is, what do you think we're going to be talking about this time next year?
God, what a question.
Honestly, I don't think I can provide an answer from having listened to you. I think that the next crisis could be one we haven't foreseen yet.
It always is. And that's always the thing. There's always going to be something that you can't control. There's always going to be something that's going to cause that anxiety, that's going to cause that stress. Having the supports, the training for people, helping them is going to be an element of what we're going to talk about next year. But in what area, who knows?
But it's a lot of the tools and the tricks that we have developed over the last 2 years that have made HR experts able to respond, and they can spot things. They have data they didn't have access to before. They have information and communications pathways. So in anything, whatever the crisis is, we're probably a little bit more resilient now than we were before.
Yes and no. I think some businesses really are, and I have to say I've seen some progressive businesses, and they're really amazing. But I think the basis is you're always going to have a crisis. I've been in work since I'm 18, and there's something always. There's always a crisis.
Just as
if
long
it's
as
not
you didn't,
internal,
as long as you
external.
didn't cause the crisis, it's okay. You can deal with the ones from outside.
So build a resilient business. Treat your staff well, so when the chips are down, they will stay with you and be there for you. Treat your suppliers with respect. Treat your, partners with respect. If you do that, you will wade through the tough times. But it's really about, not being short-sighted, in it for the long term, and treat people with respect on every part of the business. And then you'll get through any crisis.
Okay, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Sinead Prost, Head of Health and Wellbeing with Leia Healthcare, and Gillian French, Expert and Resident Employee Engagement at Work Vivo. Round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much.